Well, hello everybody, and thank you for coming. And thank you to Sean for organising today's session. Today's session is called Sound Smart, Hear Smart, and what we're all about is looking at sound and the management of sound levels in music venues, but coming at that from a hearing health perspective. So we are Hear Smart, and it really just entails a small group of people who are passionate about hearing and sound and music. And so it's Jos Mulder, who's wandering around over there. He is a sound engineer from Perth, from Murdoch University. And we also have Siobhan McGinnity, who is our PhD student from the University of Melbourne. And then I'm Liz Beach from the National Acoustic Laboratories. And so Siobhan brings audiology and a music background, and then I've got a psychology background. So together we're all sort of working to research and build up an evidence base all around sound levels in venues. Why is it that people like loud sound? How can we motivate them to protect their hearing while they're enjoying that loud sound? And so over the past 4 or 5 years, we've been doing a whole bunch of different studies, and I'll be talking about a few of those today, as will Jos. And what the aim of doing all this research is so that we can promote to the industry and to patrons, to musicians, to venue operators, how it is that we can try and prevent noise-induced hearing loss and tinnitus in all the people who go out there and listen to music. So we know that there are significant sound levels in music venues, and we know that about 15% of young adults are out there enjoying music such that they are putting themselves at risk if you compare their sound exposure levels to what you would typically get in a workplace. And so that's our current focus. That's the focus of Hear Smart for the next little while at least. And so just a little bit of structure about the session today. So we were going to split it into 3 parts. I'm going to speak first about hearing health, and then Jos is going to take over and talk a little bit more practically, I guess, in terms of the venues, the stakeholders that are involved in managing sound, and the types of people that we need to get engaged if we're going to start bringing a hearing health perspective to music venues. And then lastly, Jos is going to demonstrate a few tools that can be used in music venues to manage sound levels. So on this slide, I've collected here some sort of typical sound levels that you would expect at a bunch of different places. And so the blue columns there represent sort of industrial or typical noise levels that people tend to think about in terms of noise-induced hearing loss. So in the past, when people have talked about the risk of hearing loss from noise, they've tended to think about it in an industrial context. So it's people working in factories, it's soldiers and people in the military, it's people on construction sites that we've generally been worried about. We know that there's some loud sound levels in those sorts of environments, and that's where a lot of the effort has gone in concentrating on in providing information to people in those industries and trying to help them protect their hearing. But we know that over the last 15 to 20 years, the sound levels in music venues and other leisure venues have increased such that they're now comparable in a lot of places and a lot of the time to what you used to typically find in industrial settings. And so this is the case certainly for nightclubs, where LEQ levels have been measured up to 112 decibels, which is right up there with chainsaws and other heavy equipment. Live music gigs can range anywhere really from the 90s up to the near 100s, even fitness classes. So in particular spin classes, we've measured lots of those and found that they're often at around the 100 dB mark. And so these are new places for us to be at risk and to have our hearing at risk. And so if I can try and put it in the context of a workplace, I'm going to build up this graph, but we're just going to start here by, if you look at the yellow line, that represents 85 decibels over 8 hours. And in industry, in the workplace, that's what's known as 1 daily noise dose. So by law, it's permissible for workplaces to have environments where the noise level is 85 dB, and you're allowed to have an 8-hour shift in that sort of environment. But if the noise level goes above 85 at any point, then it's incumbent on the employer to reduce that noise. So they either need to find ways to shield the equipment that's making that noise, or perhaps they need to buy quieter equipment, or if there's no way of quietening down the equipment, they then need to look at their rostering and maybe decide that, okay, well, you'll all need to do different activities during your shift. So maybe you can spend 4 hours in that noisy environment, but then 4 hours somewhere else where it's a bit quieter. And it's all about reducing people's daily noise dose below 85 8 hours. And the daily noise dose it's important to remember, it's not just level, it's duration as well. So the louder it is, the less time you can spend in that environment. And you know, if all else fails, if you can't quieten down the equipment and if you can't move the people by rostering, then the last resort is to provide people in those environments with hearing protection. Okay, so that's the baseline we're working from. That's what's permissible in the workplace. And so now I'm going to give a few examples of our research results over the last few years where we've gone out and measured sound in lots of different environments. And so here we have a measurement from a little while ago in Melbourne. I believe it was an indie group called Laney, and the level there was 97 dB LEQ. So that's an average measurement over a 2.5 hour period. And when you compare that to the daily noise dose that you're allowed in the workplace, that was equivalent to about 5 daily noise doses. So this is the level at the audience. So we had a little measurement dosimeter where the audience would be on the dance floor there. And so people who are attending that venue that night, if they're not wearing any hearing protection and they're staying in position for the entire evening, then they're getting about a week's worth of noise. And you know, that's fine if that's your occasional gig that you go to once every now and then. Maybe you're not being exposed to noise from any other source. You know, maybe you don't ride a motorbike, and maybe you don't mow a lawn, and maybe you work in a really quiet office. And so it's not a problem necessarily for everyone in that environment. But if you think of the people who work there perhaps, or the musicians, where the noise level would certainly have been louder on stage, if you think about the bar staff, and other people who go to gigs, you know, several times a week, then the dose that they're getting from music is potentially quite significant and certainly comparable to what you would be getting at a very noisy workplace. And so we're just going to build up with a few examples here. So the next one we've got is a Powderfinger concert back in the day when they were still performing. And so the level there was 100 dB, and increasing that time period to 3 hours, and that's got a significant increase in the daily noise doses there. So that single concert was 11 daily noise doses, so about 2 weeks worth of noise. Then we've got a Metallica concert from a few years ago, and this is the type of concert where you can certainly expect loud levels, so 103 dB there, again around 3 hours, but this time the noise dose has doubled again because we've gone up 3 dB. So every increase by 3 dB, you need to halve the time that you can spend in that environment. So the Metallica concert is essentially worth a month's worth of permissible workplace noise, 23 days in one hit. And then this one is from not so long ago at a venue in Melbourne that will remain nameless. And thankfully none of us were there. But the level in this music venue was 109 dB. It was about a 4-hour gig, and when you're at those sorts of levels for that sort of duration, the noise dose just rises exponentially. And so in fact, it's an incredible 130 daily noise doses for that single event. So I think that illustrates just how loud music can be and how loud it is. This is an extreme example, but I don't think it's an isolated example. It's something that we've seen on more than one occasion, and it's something that's happening in small venues. And you know, this is the type of thing that we're worried about, and that we're trying to talk to people about, and trying to work out ways that we can manage sound levels like that and exposures like that, and let people know that if they are in those environments, they are getting really extreme noise doses compared to what's permissible in the workplace. And just to round the message home, this is the rest of the recording for the rest of that evening there. So the club was open for 8 hours, so there's a live band playing those first 3 sections there, the first 3 sets, and then there's a little bit of a break, and then it looks like a DJ comes on again at about 2 a.m. in the morning. And when you add it all together, the average is 107, and the daily noise doses pop up to 160. So I don't know if people work there for that entire period of time, but if they do, they're certainly getting an incredible amount of noise, and you know, you would hope that they're wearing hearing protection for at least some of that time. Okay, so how do these sorts of noise levels affect your hearing, potentially? So this is some of Siobhan's research that she's been working on over the last couple of years for her PhD. And so what she did here was to talk to some sound engineers and to ask them had they ever experienced any symptoms of hearing damage. So the typical symptoms that we relate to hearing damage include tinnitus, so any sort of ringing in the ears, particularly after loud noise. Often it's intermittent, or you experience it and it's sort of worse directly after noise, and then it goes away. And so an incredible 88% of people, of sound engineers, told Siobhan that they had experienced tinnitus, and about half of them had experienced dullness. And so that's that feeling when you've been in a loud place and it's almost like your ears have shut down a little bit, or maybe you feel like they're a bit blocked. You get that dull sensation, and that's called a temporary threshold shift. And so about half the sound engineers reported experiencing that regularly. And so both of those symptoms are signs that damage has occurred, and they're the sorts of signs that we talk to people about. If you're regularly experiencing a sense of dullness and you're regularly experiencing ringing in the ears, then that's your sign. That's your ears telling you that damage is being done, and it's probably time to do something about it and to try and minimise your experience of those symptoms to avoid long-term damage down the track. On the right-hand side, there's a graph which shows hearing. So Siobhan was able to test the hearing of some of the sound engineers that answered her survey. And so this is an audiogram, and so across the bottom we've got the frequencies, so the lower frequencies on the left, high frequencies on the right, and higher on the graph is better. And so what Siobhan did here was split the sound engineers into people who use hearing protection a lot, so they were the green people, and the people in red are those who wear earplugs less frequently. And you can see there's a trend, quite a clear trend, that in virtually every frequency there that was measured, the people who aren't using earplugs very often, the people in red, have worse hearing thresholds than the people who are protecting their hearing at least some of the time. And interesting to see the particular difference at the high frequency end. There's some research building at the moment which is showing that that it's the high frequencies, the really high frequencies up above 8 kilohertz, where we think noise damage is starting to show itself earlier. And I know that sound engineers pride themselves on their hearing and being able to hear tiny little hisses and sounds that other people can't hear. And so this is demonstrating that that sound engineers are putting that particular specialised hearing acuity that they pride themselves on at risk from their very work. And so what sort of context are we trying to spread our message in? Well, it's a really hard context to work in because loud music is sort of culturally embedded in our entertainment. And what we've got here is a model that was developed by a couple of guys from New Zealand. It's an interesting read. If you want to get a hold of this paper, just contact me, I can send it to you. But they basically talk about 3 parallel processes that are going on that they think have led to this situation that we're in at the moment, where loud sound is sort of, it's expected. Whenever you go out, whenever you go to a music venue, there's an expectation that it's going to be loud. So on the inner ring there, you can see they talk about the concept of adaptation, that our ears adapt to loud sound. So whether we like loud sound or not, there's this process of adaptation going on where our ears get used to that loud sound when we're in there for an extended period of time, and then we start to tolerate it better. And then there's an element of conditioning going on, and that's the process whereby you go to a venue, you're having a really good time, you're listening to a band you like, you're having a few drinks, you're meeting your friends, and so you start to associate loud sound with positive experiences. And so that's a conditioning effect where you start to associate loud sound with positive, going out vibes. And then on the outer ring there, it's sort of where it becomes a cultural process. And so that's where we build into the process that when you go out, you expect to be entertained, you therefore expect to have a good time, you expect loud music, and then venues expect that that's what people want, and then they provide the loud music, and it sort of becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of expectation on both sides, on both the punters' side and the musicians and the venues. And so I think the interesting question, and one which we've tried to ask in some of our studies, is okay, loud sound, loud music, and that whole sort of culture is, we know that it's sort of true and it's embedded in sort of modern society. But is it actually the case that all patrons do prefer the levels that they're getting in these venues, considering the fact that the levels seem to be increasing over time? And so we've used this scale in a few different studies. We've used it in online surveys and face-to-face. And I mean, it's a pretty rough sort of scale, but it seems to work. And basically we ask people to think about how easy or difficult it is to have a conversation in a certain place. It's just a way of getting a sense of how loud they think a place is. So we say, you know, was the sound level such that if you were to try and have a conversation, it would be impossible, even when you're shouting, down to, well, no, I could easily hold a conversation in this place without even raising my voice. And so we use this sort of scale, and we go around and we ask people, you know, what's the typical noise level of the places you go out? What's the typical noise level in this club? And then what we usually do is, after a few questions later in our survey, we'll say, well, what's your preferred level? If you could choose on the same scale, where would you prefer the sound level to be at the types of places you go to? And what we find, in general, not everybody, but in general, we find that typical sound levels are higher than preferred sound levels. And there's this general trend that people realise and they expect that sound will be loud enough that they will have to raise their voice, but they don't want to need to shout. So there's this levelling here that they seem to be getting sound, or we're delivering them sound that's slightly louder than they actually want it to be. And again, not for everyone, but for most people. And so just transferring this onto a decibel scale. So we've done a study where we can show that this scale actually maps quite nicely onto decibels. So if you look at what it really means, it means that people are saying they would prefer sound levels in this green range. So around sort of the 85 to 95 level is probably closer to what people are happy with. You certainly need to raise your voice in that level, but it's the levels up around 100, 105, 110 that they're saying that's actually louder than they want. And one last study before I finish. This is a silent disco study, which I kind of like, because what we've got people to do was to wear headphones in a silent disco setting. And the reason for doing that was because here they could set their own volume levels, and other people needn't know what level they had set their headphones at. And so we let them dance and set the volume at whatever level they wanted, and then they took off their headphones, and then we measured them on an acoustic head a little bit later on, so we could actually see what level people were listening at. And then we also asked them, you know, the level you finished your disco at, did you like that level? Were you happy with that? Or would you have preferred to be able to ramp it up a bit higher? And we found that 75% of people were perfectly happy with the level that they had set. And that for those 75% of people, it was in the lower end of the 90s. And it's just this sort of 25% group that we tend to see that want to ramp up the levels. And so I think that's a pretty interesting observation in terms of what people's preferred sound levels really are.